Chapter 349. Chapter 346. The Scent of Blood. Gray's nostrils filled with the metallic tang of blood and flesh from various beasts mingled together. Amidst the primordial forest, Gray panted for breath. Primordial forest, a paradise and hell for beasts. This forest Gray currently wandered was a space created by the primordial darkness, a place to test the qualifications for becoming the king of beasts. A primordial world where all manner of creatures that have existed since ancient times coexisted. Here, in this vast land, extinct giant mammoths, red-maned lions ruling the savannas, and countless predators from different eras and locations existed together. Only a being capable of dominating this primordial world with overwhelming power was qualified to inherit the primordial darkness. Growl. Just then, from the shadows of the dense forest, another group of predators revealed themselves. A giant rhinoceros with skin like steel armor, a black-maned lion, and a red-eyed bear. Each beast emanated a potent scent. Grrr. Seeing them, Gray also bared his teeth. He lowered his body slightly. The moment he gripped the ground firmly with his front paws, sharp claws emerged, scratching the earth. The giant rhinoceros eyed Gray's posture, growling arrogantly. A thick smell of blood clung to its body as well. It must have just finished hunting other beasts, like himself. Indeed, countless carcasses lay scattered along Gray's path, some half-eaten, others simply left dead. Seeing the defeated, easily numbering over several hundred, the rhinoceros let out a low growl, almost like a scoff. And immediately after pawing the ground, rumble. Its massive body charged fiercely towards Gray, displaying overwhelming power and speed that shook the forest with the force of its charge alone. But, just as its hard horn aimed to pierce Gray's torso with that momentum, whoosh! Gray leaped upwards like the wind. The rhinoceros's horn futilely cut through the air. Crunch! Immediately after, Gray's fangs sank deep into its neck. Quarg! The rhinoceros roared, shaking its body violently. But the more it struggled, the stronger and deeper Gray's claws and fangs pierced through its thick hide, digging into the delicate flesh beneath. He bit and clawed, tearing out chunks of meat. Quaduck! Finally, blood erupted. A thick artery burst beneath Gray's teeth, and crimson liquid spurted like a fountain. The beast bellowed. Perfect. Watching the entire scene from behind, the Fang Monarch Rakan's lips curled upwards. You've become quite the hunter. He was deeply moved. Rakan suddenly recalled the first time he saw Gray. A weak pup, listless and near death. A mere whelp dying, having its blood sucked by Braki of the Hyena clan. Fortunately saved by Suho, but having spent his life within the sanctuary since birth, he was a novice who had never properly learned how to hunt. That was Gray, the last descendant of his clan. Thankfully, he had gained a lot of hunting experience alongside Suho since then, but those were the combat methods of a hunting dog. However, first and foremost, the king of beasts is not someone's hunting dog, but a hunter. One must seize the qualification as the apex predator through one's own strength. Thud. Finally, the rhinoceros, after struggling for some time, breathed its last, the massive body collapsing. Before it, the remaining predators pawed the ground, growling. They couldn't hide their bewilderment at the giant dying so easily. Grrr. Gray stood proudly, placing a front paw on the rhinoceros's carcass, glaring at the remaining beasts. Fierce eyes. Yet, an unhurried calmness was felt in Gray's chilling gaze. Grasping his presence, the predators flinched, lowering their stances. Good, Rakan nodded. Looking back, Gray had never once held back or shrunk before enemies since the succession ceremony began. He may have never properly learned hunting methods, but neither had he learned retreat. That itself was the history of struggle Gray had learned from Suho. Whoa! Finally, unable to bear it, the red-eyed bear charged first. Gray turned his body to meet it, but aiming for that moment, the black-maned lion simultaneously lunged at Gray's flank, an unexpected pincer attack. Sometimes, predators coordinate attacks against a single enemy. It is instinct, requiring no conversation. Before Rakan's explanation could even finish, the situation unfolded and concluded in an instant. Thwack! The lion's paw struck Gray. Perhaps in a normal situation, this single blow would have inflicted a fatal wound, tearing the opponent's internal organs. But Gray endured. The lion's fierce attack couldn't penetrate his thick fur, and Gray, simply taking the blow, twisted his body almost simultaneously and caught the lion's neck in a single bite. Crunch! The The sound of the spinal bones being instantly crushed was heard. Quang! Discarding the lion, Gray instantly turned and fiercely extended his front paw towards the chest of the charging red-eyed bear in exactly the same attack the lion tried on him. Thwack! With that one blow, the bear's heart was destroyed. Instant death. The bear lost the light in its eyes without even uttering a scream. Witnessing that scene, the remaining predators turned tail and began to flee in panic. Grrrk! Gray didn't stand still. He targeted the fastest among them and gave chase. When running, Gray was like living lightning. He tripped the fleeing puma by hooking its hind leg with his front paw, then tore into its neck. Meanwhile, the other predators vanished into the jungle. Will you pursue? Rakan asked. Gray shook his head without hesitation. Then, he turned back, approached the rhinoceros carcass, and devoured its heart. Thus, he consumed the flesh of the creatures he had hunted, one by one. A wise decision. If you left such tempting prey behind, only hyena-like creatures would feast. In the primordial forest, one had to eat when possible. If prey hid away, even the strongest predator could starve. And hyenas, lurking in the darkness, lay in wait, anticipating the moment a starved predator weakened. If you have stored up enough strength, move on. At that suggestion, Gray lifted his head. Rakan frowned, perhaps finding the expression displeasing. Where to go, you ask? Why question me about that? This world is a trial made for you. Wherever your paws touch is the path. Everything else was already sufficient, but this was Gray's biggest problem. Having always trotted behind Suho, he didn't know how to choose his own prey by his own will. A hunting dog. That was Gray's limitation. Rakan clicked his tongue and spoke. If you desire a stronger foe, seek the darker places. In this primordial forest, there are still plenty of creatures left for you to hunt. In the trial to become the king of beasts, the primordial darkness required Gray to hunt every type of beast existing in the primordial forest. Only by finding, hunting, and devouring all of them could he prove himself the true king of beasts. But the problem was that they didn't attack all at once. Beasts acted according to their own characteristics. Some, thankfully, formed packs and attacked. However, others lay in wait, seeking only opportunity, remaining hidden until the end. Far more beasts waited patiently for him to tire and weaken first. Tracking them down and hunting every single one was the task given to Gray. Still, you are doing better than expected. Regardless, since you were confined to the sanctuary from birth, if you cannot master these wild hunting methods, you are not qualified to be king. As Rakan said, everything Gray needed was gathered in this forest. Thanks to that, Gray was growing steadily over time. But the problem was that as he grew stronger, the other predators increasingly hid deeper in the darkness. What could be done? Even the strongest possessed no instinct to attack a beast stronger than themselves without provocation. Grr. Thus, Gray had to blindly roam the dark forest, searching for his next prey, seeking deeper, darker places. And eventually, he encountered the tree, being lurking deep within the darkness beyond. Giant horns, eyes overflowing with a terrifyingly immense aura. Behemoth, one of the races that met extinction at my hands. Quang. Combat was immediate. Behemoth, a monster 3 or 4 times Gray's size, charged, breaking through all the trees in its path. Rakan advised. You've gone too deep. At your current level, this is clearly a strong enemy. Retreat and build up your strength. Growl. You do not listen. Let's reiterate, Gray had never learned retreat. A thorough hunting dog. He wouldn't seek prey himself, but once prey appeared before him, how strong the opponent was mattered little. He simply fought back. Grrr! Attack, then attack again. Even against the behemoth, possessing overwhelmingly superior strength, Gray sought openings and fiercely bit and tore. The exact opposite situation from before. Gray's teeth couldn't penetrate the behemoth's thick hide, but after several attempts, his fangs barely reached the creature's weakest point, the Achilles tendon. At that moment, Gray uses skill, paralysis. Perhaps if Suho had been present, he would have seen these system messages. Rakan's fang and Kasaka's venom fang, which he had given Gray. These two possessed opposite characteristics. The effects attached to Rakan's fang were critical wound and contempt for the weak, powers for when the strong dominated the weak. Conversely, Kasaka's venom fang was a power more effective when the weak fought the strong. Effect paralysis, target cannot move. Effect bleed, Target loses 1% HP per second. The wound was clearly shallow, and the effects were faint, but it definitely worked. The behemoth's massive body momentarily stumbled, limping. Now, retreat and wait for an opportunity. Growl, such a fearless creature. Gray moved contrary to Rakan's advice. Seeing the behemoth show an opening, however brief, he seized the moment, climbing onto the behemoth's back, aiming for its neck. Thwack! But he was wrong. Only one leg was paralyzed. Struck by the behemoth's massive arm, Gray was flung away, tumbling wretchedly on the ground. And immediately, towards his location, a tree trunk, ripped out roots and all, was swung like a whip. Quang! Gray, without blinking an eye, faced the attack, filling his entire field of vision, and bared his teeth ferociously. Quar! With the intent to bite and destroy the entire log, descending with immense destructive force. This! At that moment, when even Rakan, who had remained calm throughout, let out an urgent cry. Woof! Gray's eyes, which had been those of a ferocious predator, suddenly sparkled brightly. Because right in front of him, Suho stood, blocking the log with one hand. Sorry. Am I a bit late? Suho spoke, smiling broadly, looking not at the mighty beast behemoth, but at Gray. Seeing his smile, Gray finally grinned too, his mouth splitting wide, tongue lolling out, tail wagging. This is undoubtedly a dog. Rakan lamented at the pathetic sight. But on the other hand, it was fortunate. As had been the case with all previous successor candidates, having a priest present makes the succession smoother. Hadn't even those lacking qualification received the primordial darkness thanks to Suho? But, shiver. The moment Rakan actually looked at Suho's form, his expression stiffened rigidly. Wait, who are you? Accompanying that was a look of utter astonishment. The Suho, who appeared before him, was not the Suho Rakan had known until now. Have you inherited the Dragon King's darkness? No, even so, this aura. Rakan couldn't help but trail off. The presence Suho currently exuded overwhelmed the entire primordial forest. The aura emanating from the current Suho was so profound that even Rakan, the former monarch, couldn't possibly fathom it. A bottomless pit that felt like it would suck him in just by looking. A distant abyss was felt. What in the world have you become? Rakan asked, wary of him. Beneath Suho's feet, his elongated shadow harbored a pure white darkness. Grrrr! It wasn't just Rakan who felt wary. The hegemon of this region, Behemoth, roared, putting strength into the log it swung, which was being blocked effortlessly with one hand. Suho, before answering Rakan's question, glanced up at the Behemoth. But the creature was too tall. My neck hurts from looking up. Kneel. With that single word, immense pressure crushed the Behemoth. Kung! The Behemoth, forcibly pressed to the ground, thrashed its enormous body, a most humiliating posture for the king of the primordial forest. But no matter how much it struggled, getting up was impossible. It felt as if an invisible giant hand was pressing down on its body, truly an immense pressure. Ruler's authority. Rakan recognized the nature of the power Suho was using, but it was on a different level from what he knew. Until now, Suho had used the ruler's authority in the form of a skill. But now it was different. This is not a skill. It was as if Suho himself had become a true ruler, as if he were using the true authority he had possessed since birth. Rakan swallowed dryly and asked Suho again, "Who are you?" He had to be extremely cautious. What if Suho's vessel was so vast that it couldn't be fathomed? If such a profound aura was felt even after receiving the Dragon King's primordial darkness, could he truly be satisfied with just one? A monarch cannot harbor more than one primordial darkness. That was an impossibility. But, upon actually facing Suho, Rakan thought that perhaps it could be possible. If so, Suho, no, the entity that appeared in Suho's form, could it be aiming for the primordial darkness Gray was trying to inherit? Rakan was so bewildered by his aura that such a suspicion arose. But when Suho finally spoke, the tension that made the air feel as thick as water dissipated in an instant. "Gray, you've worked hard. You're quite impressive as you are now, however." Grrr! Suho's hand stroked him. Gray, in turn, wagged his tail, rubbing his head against Suho's hand with a friendly expression. "Batha!" Riding Suho's hand, an unidentified blessing descended upon Gray's head. A white light. No, a white shadow. Krr! Instantly, Gray's eyes trembled. All of his fatigue and accumulated wounds, from pushing himself beyond his limits until now, vanished, melting away as if they were snow. Flash! All his energy was restored. Moreover, a new energy welled up from Gray's body, as if he had leveled up. Seeing Gray's transformation, Rakan was greatly astonished. He surpassed the wall. Rakan's eyes could see it too. The fact that a tremendous change had occurred within Gray. It was unbelievable. To grow like this even without yet obtaining the primordial darkness. It's a level up, Suho answered his unspoken question, in a tone as if it were perfectly natural. Until now, Gray has consistently offered half of his experience points to me as a tribute. The system bound Gray to me that way, to assist my rapid growth. That was Gray's role as defined by the system, to offer half the sustenance obtained from hunting to Suho, a full half. But Suho had never once thought of him as a pet. Comrade in arms. Suho recalled the past events. Looking back, Gray was the very first companion who had fought alongside him. Now he had many allies, but Gray was the comrade in arms who had first lent him strength. Of course, Beru was there before him, but Beru only offered encouragement and advice, never fighting alongside him. Suho gently stroked Gray, who was enveloped in the white shadow, and spoke. Thank you for everything until now, so I'll return what should have originally been yours. Whoosh! Through the white shadow, half the experience points he ever earned and gave to Suho returned to Gray, which meant Gray would become twice as strong. Take it. I've added hefty interest. No, even more than that. Grrr! Good heavens! An exclamation mixed with a sigh escaped Rakan's lips. Gray's aura had changed. With Gray's roar, a truly immense energy erupted as if exploding. Seeing that, Suho smiled contentedly and said, Until now, you've lent me your strength, so this time, let's do it the other way around. Possession. Through the numerous battles, Gray's spirit had possessed Suho's body, lending him strength. That was possible because Suho was the priest for the dead monarch. But now, there was no need for that. The dead monarch. The one aspiring to be the next monarch. And the primordial darkness. All were gathered in one place at the same time. Suho, no longer as a priest, but as a comrade in arms, cheered Gray on. Go, Gray, hunt that behemoth and prove your worth. At Suho's words, Gray's lips curled into a wide smile, and as he turned his head again, looking at the behemoth lying flat on its stomach, Gray's eyes turned fierce. Grrr! The hunt began. Boom! The moment Gray leaped towards the behemoth, the pressure pinning it also vanished. At that instant, the creature also sprang towards Gray, fearlessly charging. Krah! Like a compressed spring suddenly released. Kukwakwang. A great collision occurred, but the behemoth seemed sluggish. The attacks that had felt fast before now looked slow in Gray's eyes. He lightly swatted away the massive arm with his front paw and lunged towards the monster's neck. But the behemoth, too, was a predator. Instead of twisting its body to avoid the teeth, it raised its other arm and mercilessly struck Gray down. Thwack! The situation was similar to before, but the result was different. Its massive limb didn't fling Gray away. Instead, he twisted his head sideways and bit squarely into that arm, tendon, artery. The correct hunting method taught to him by the former monarch, Rakan. Not just biting wherever the mouth reached, but using the eyes and senses to spot the weak points that inflict fatal wounds on the prey. Then using the powerful fangs that pierce hide and flesh, puncturing its blood vessels. Crunch! Skill fatal wound is activated. Gray's fangs mercilessly tore into the behemoth's tendon. Then the wound gaped open, and blood gushed out. Grrr! The behemoth's scream echoed. Just moments ago, Gray had been fighting like the weak against the strong. But now, with Suho, it was the exact opposite. He was employing the method of the strong hunting the weak. Grrr! At that roar, the behemoth's complexion changed drastically. Gray uses skill, contempt for the weak. Effect fear is activated. Target's all stats are reduced by 50% for 1 minute. Gray leaped and spun, thrusting his sharp fangs towards its eye. Stab! The behemoth's eye burst. In immense pain, the creature shook its body. Kruk! Before Gray's one-sided assault, the behemoth realized how powerless it was. Under Suho's blessing, Gray thus became the true king of beasts. The fight was over, but it was merely the beginning. Starting with the behemoth, all the predators of the primordial forest fell helplessly before Gray's fangs. Hiding in the darkness was useless now. Suho's pure white shadow illuminated all the shades that had concealed them. Oh. Gray trampled them and howled toward the sky, like a wolf. It was the moment the true ruler of the primordial forest was born. This should be qualification enough, Nidhogg? Suho looked up at the clear sky of the primordial forest and grinned. Then, Nidhogg's answer came from the unseen distance, not with a voice, but with action. Fwiak! Then, the primordial forest itself, surrounding Gray, melted away, becoming primordial darkness and beginning to be absorbed into him. Gray, without the slightest panic, devoured that immense energy as if it were only natural, proudly. Finally, the time has come to relinquish my seat. Rakan nodded, relieved. He had been wary at first, but fortunately, Suho did not covet the primordial darkness meant for Gray. Thankfully, as always, he had actively helped Gray's succession ceremony as a priest. At that, Rakan bared his teeth, smiling with utmost satisfaction as he looked at Gray. But the lineage of the Fang clan ends with this. Gray, I shall leave you a new name, Ting. The king of beasts, monarch of the hunt, is born. Monarch of the hunt. A predator that always gives its all in the hunt, whether the prey is strong or weak. To think the pup, once caught and exploited by hyenas, would grow up to stand at the apex of the primordial forest like this. Rakan had watched over that entire growth process. This is all thanks to you, priest, Sung Suho. The form of Rakan, the former monarch, grew increasingly transparent as he turned to look at Suho. Amidst the primordial darkness swirling around Gray, as the primordial forest was sucked into Gray, Suho stood tall, unwavering, directly meeting his gaze. He spoke, smiling with utmost sincerity in his eyes. Thank you for everything, child of the shadow. Thank you for everything too, Rakan. What happens to you now? I return to nothingness. Will I not see you again? Suho asked what he had always wondered. In the process of helping several monarchs with their succession until now, the dead monarchs never showed themselves again. He knew they returned to nothingness once the next monarch was born, but he was curious about the process or principle. Until now, there was no way to know, but today, Suho had a brief moment of leeway to converse with Rakan, who was disappearing in the process of succession. At Suho's question, Rakan murmured with a surprised expression, "See me again. Could it be that you've grown fond of me who bared my fangs at your father? Well, the more usable pieces one has, the better." Rakan, growing even more transparent, let out a hollow laugh, and he spoke in a serious tone. A dead monarch returns to nothingness. That is the established principle. Nothing changes. But as for the process or principle, only a monarch who had personally experienced death could answer. What comes after death, one cannot know until one dies. Therefore, Rakan could answer a little more concretely. To be more precise, when a monarch dies, he is swallowed by the primordial darkness he harbored. That is what it means to return to nothingness. Thump. His transparent hand casually patted the head of Gray, who was engrossed in absorbing the primordial darkness. But when the next monarch is born like this, the situation changes slightly, much like when the former shadow monarch Ashborn passed all his power to your father. Just as Ashborn and Sung Jinwoo became one, I too will melt into the primordial darkness and become one with Gray. Become one? Yes, it's just a matter of who becomes the dominant entity, but it's assimilation. Just as Ashborn disappeared and your father came to exist as the shadow monarch, but Ashborn is likely still within your father, cheering on his endeavors. Is that answer somewhat satisfactory? As Suho nodded, Rakan chuckled and vanished from the spot. He had been absorbed into Gray along with the primordial darkness. Thus, Gray, having become the monarch of the hunt, had eyes that were different from before, mature and deep, like Rakan's. The dignity of a great monarch that Suho had felt when he first met Rakan was now emanating from Gray. Flash. Thus, Suho and Gray exited Nidhogg. They reunited with Circa, Beru, and Amut, who were waiting outside. Young master. Beru flew over, whimpering and clung tightly to Suho. Behind him, Amut crossed his arms and nodded. A new monarch has been born, but still not yet? Amut looked at Suho and tilted his head. Like Gray, primordial darkness was felt from Suho, but if asked whether he had become a monarch, not yet. I postponed the answer a bit. Suho was still not a monarch. Calculating advancement points, I decided to answer after earning more advancement points. At Suho's words, the white shadow beneath Suho's feet flickered, as if urging for an answer. Well then, shall we take care of the overdue tasks one by one? Suho immediately announced the next course of action. First, the Apostle of Conquest. Without hesitation, he moved towards where Arsha was holding the Apostle of Conquest captive. Meanwhile, the Apostle of Conquest, held captive in the void insect's nest, wore a savagely contorted expression. How could this happen? The final moments of his clones, scattered across the world and linked by the hive mind, were being vividly relayed into his consciousness. New York, Shanghai, Tokyo. His clones in various parts of the world were being extinguished one by one. Their dying voices flowed toward him, the main body. Crack! Thomas Andre! How could he? Chahayan's lightning decimated everyone. Sungwon, a human wielding the power of a high priest, is hearing. Sword skills. Even the civilians have become awakened. Flash, crackle, rumble. Voices mingled with fear and awe. Their screams from various locations, accompanied by the roar of intense battle, ultimately became their last words. But even in such a situation, there was nothing he, the main body, could do, nothing but watch their final moments from here. He lamented. How could this be? Our plan was perfect. Variables always exist, you know. Arsha, displaying an elegant posture before the Apostle of Conquest, bound in magical chains, spoke. You all underestimated the potential of the human race too much. How on earth, how could humans become this strong, growing through pain and trials? That is the essence of life, after all. To think it was possible to turn humans with no mana aptitude into true awakened individuals in the Tower of Trials. The Apostle of Conquest simply couldn't believe the current outcome. His strategy had been flawless. Battle and war are different. No matter how strong an individual named Suho was, no matter how much his allies had awakened as the next monarchs, even if they could lose in direct combat, there were countless weaknesses to exploit when looking at it from the perspective of war. In fact, there were too many. All of humanity on Earth was their weakness. But now, even those ordinary citizens were becoming awakened and playing their part. In reality, the Apostle of Conquest's plan had failed utterly in every aspect. You bastards. The main body of the Apostle of Conquest, gritting his teeth in frustration and anger, cursed Suho as soon as he appeared before him. Just you wait. It's only a matter of time. Someday, my great God will surely descend upon this land. At that time, no matter how much you struggle, it will be useless. Even hearing such curses to his face, Suho calmly looked at the Apostle of Conquest's main body, and placing a hand on his head, he opened his mouth. You curse me, but I, in turn, shall bless you. What? The blessing of the dead world tree. At Suho's words, the Apostle of Conquest's venomous glare wavered. For a long time, the world tree purified dead souls and bore fruit. New souls were born and circulated from those fruits, but from the most luscious fruits among them, the soldiers of the rulers were often born. Though the world tree is dead now and cannot perform its function. Fa! With a calm voice, a white energy from Suho's hand seeped into the Apostle of Conquest. I can! Flash! Instantly, the Apostle of Conquest's vision went dark. His pupils turned white. The Apostle of Conquest, eyes wide and whitened, gritted his teeth and shrieked into the void. Whatever you're doing, it's useless. I am the Apostle of Conquest, bestowed with power by the great God. Turning me into a mere shadow soldier is absolutely impossible. My father said it was possible. Even your father cannot turn all apostles into soldiers, especially not beings like me, whose soul is fragmented. The types of creatures created by the Itarim were truly diverse. Among them, some creatures had souls so bizarre that they definitely couldn't be extracted as shadow soldiers. The Apostle of Conquest was one of them. But, maybe not a shadow soldier, but how about this? Suho playfully raised the corners of his mouth. However, the situation that unfolded immediately after was by no means a joke. Wah! Instantly, the Apostle of Conquest saw it. The pure white shadow cast before him. He lifted his head and looked up, and his soul trembled with genuine terror. It was the White Knight. The shadow of the world tree, so vast its end couldn't be seen, was looking down at him from that high place. And looking again, clearing his eyes, that shadow had, at some point, transformed into Sung Suho's form. Looking up at that incredibly high place, the Apostle of Conquest let out a wretched groan. You are, what in the world? Suho looked down at him and spoke calmly. You don't even qualify to become a shadow soldier. Instead, I shall extract all your nutrients. Fruit of the world tree. Schlurp. At that moment, the Apostle of Conquest's soul was forcibly torn out by the white shadow, and then purification, compression, crystallization, extraction. Ting, successfully extracted runestone, Apostle of Conquest. Suho knew now how the rulers had created runestones all this time, how so many runestones had been made. The answer was the fruit of the world tree, just like the way the rulers' soldiers were born. Extracting only the properties contained within a dead soul and recreating it as a single tool was also the role of the world tree. Suho, having understood that principle, could now imitate that role. Arsha. Suho handed the runestone he had thus extracted to Arsha. You eat it. It's a power I don't need. At Suho's command, Arsha opened her mouth as if entranced, wearing an expression of utter ecstasy. Gulp. At that moment, flash. Arsha's body cracked as if it would shatter, and immense light poured out from the fissures, like a bomb on the verge of explosion. Due to the runestone of the Apostle of Conquest that Arsha had swallowed, all the abilities the Apostle of Conquest had harbored began to bloom within Arsha simultaneously. She tried to scream from the extreme pain, but Suho's hand covered Arsha's mouth as he spoke firmly. Don't spit it out. Swallow it to the end. This is your trial. Simultaneously, Suho spread his other hand and extended it sideways. At its end was Nidhogg, frozen by Circa's power. If you endure, I will personally bring it to you, the primordial darkness meant for the queen of insects. Clang clang, ruler's authority. At that moment, Circa's sturdy ice shattered, and the last remaining head of Nidhogg, trapped within, was forcibly dragged towards Suho's outstretched hand. Grrrr. Nidhogg, even while being pulled by the immense force, opened its maw towards Suho with a fierce expression, but compared to when they first met, it was merely a single remaining head. Conversely, from Suho's perspective, who had grown tremendously compared to then, Nidhogg was no longer a match. Kayak! Ruler's authority! Following Suho's outstretched hand, the moment he clenched his fist, an invisible giant hand seized Nidhogg and crushed it. Boom! Nidhogg exploded, and pitch-black darkness burst out from within like fireworks. Ting! Hogg has been defeated. It was absurdly easy. As if he had hunted an ordinary magical beast, system messages appeared before Suho consecutively. Ting! 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 Level up! Level up! An enormous level up. It was truly a feast of immense experience points. Previously, when Suho had faced Nidhogg's heads one by one, there had been no experience points. But now, this was the result of having defeated the creature itself, not just its part. However, to the current Suho, levels were no longer important. More significant was the achievement. The very act of defeating Nidhogg with his own hands was more significant, because that was the feat that proved his qualification, his advancement points. Calculating advancement points. As if to show off, the system had been continuously calculating Suho's achievements, successfully extracted fruit of the world tree. Bonus points. Awarded. Defeated Nidhogg, the serpent that gnaws at the roots of the world tree. But it wasn't over yet. Calculating advancement points. Schwack! The last primordial darkness that burst from Nidhogg was sucked into Suho's hand. He compressed it again. Forcibly grasping it, the masterless primordial darkness thrashed in Suho's hand, trying to escape. Wait, you'll have a master soon enough. The more it struggled, the tighter Suho gripped, and just then, good news arrived. A deep sigh escaped Arsha's lips, who had been using all her strength to digest the swallowed power. She had finally perfectly absorbed the runestone, Apostle of Conquest. The result was astounding. Just like the Apostle of Conquest, the King of Butterflies was born from a pupa. The Queen of Void Insects, Arsha had evolved from a queen bee. There were many similarities between these two. Perhaps because their fundamental nature was that of insects, Arsha succeeded in perfectly making all the abilities the Apostle of Conquest wielded her own. Suho, recognizing that fact at a glance, curled his lips upwards. You worked hard, but the real trial starts now, so endure it again. Ugh! Whack! Suho, giving her no time to rest, fed the grasped primordial darkness directly into Arsha's mouth again. But fortunately, since the vessel was already complete, there was no pain. Flash! The primordial darkness smoothly settled within Arsha's body. And when Arsha opened her eyes again, It resided within her luminous pupils. Ting. The queen of insects, monarch of the void, is born. Finally, a new queen of insects was born. Along with that, ting, ting, bonus points awarded. Total advancement points have exceeded the achievement limit. A special reward will be given according to the contract. Finally, Suho's class was also decided. Your class has been determined. At that moment, the white shadow, elongated beneath Suho's feet, smiled and spoke to him, strictly adhering to the system's way. Analyzing players' actions to assign a suitable class. Wherever the player stays, the breath of the Reaper always lingers. Wherever the player passes, corpses pile up, and the stench of blood fills the air. Your desire for great power is strong enough to summon the wandering spirits from the Valley of Death. The army of the dead following your command will forge a path for you alone, without anyone's help. Furthermore, the player craves great power, does not rely on companions. Solely with his own strength. Crackle. Suddenly, the predetermined messages delivered by the system distorted midway, and the characters shattered. Then, those characters reassembled themselves here and there, creating a new message solely for Suho. Unlike Sung Jinwoo, who had always fought alone, Suho had consistently fought alongside his companions, and to be of help to his father, who was fighting overwhelming enemies, he had striven with all his might, using any means necessary. Sometimes those means were strength and tenacity. Sometimes those methods involved the Tower of Trials or virtual reality games, inducing the awakening of all humanity. The result? Ting. Your creativity allows you to reach a positive solution somehow, in any moments of crisis. Your righteous heart will influence those around you, enabling everyone to reach the correct outcome. The player is granted the choice of one of three classes. 3 choices. Suho calmly looked at the options that appeared before him. The first class is Soul Striker. Interpreting past data, the player is granted the hidden class Soul Striker. This was the dream he had in high school. It was Soul Striker, the advanced class of the martial artist he had once class changed into back then. The second class is Monarch of Destruction. At that moment, Ragnar appeared beside Suho as if waiting, casting a solemn gaze. Within it, the Dragon King Antares watched Suho's choice. To the player who overcame the Dragon King's trials and proudly proved his qualification, the power of the King of Dragons, Monarch of Destruction, is granted. But even under the Dragon King's fiery gaze, Suho did not waver. So what's the last one? After all, Suho's choice lay beyond that. The first 2 classes were already his, powers he had already achieved through his own efforts. There was no need to choose them again. And the reason he had forcibly postponed his class change, going as far as to finally defeat Nidhogg, annihilate the Apostle of Conquest, and ultimately make all his companions new monarchs. The fruition of diligently scraping together as many advancement points as possible before the class change had finally arrived before Suho. The third class is... Suho chose that class without hesitation. Flash! The player class changes to Monarch of Transcendence. Thus, the primordial darkness received from the Dragon King Antares was reborn under the name Monarch of Transcendence. But Suho did not become a king. Suho, being human, could not become the king of dragons, nor did Suho wish to become the king of humans. There was a far more fitting name. Flash. The Guardian of the World Tree, Monarch of Transcendence, is born. Guardian of the World Tree. Having conquered the Sea of the Afterlife. Having found the dying World Tree somewhere in that vast sea, and having proudly proven, through his own efforts, his qualification to stand face to face with the shadow of the World Tree, Suho's new name was Guardian of the World Tree. Watching Suho's form, the Dragon King Antares savored the name with a peculiar expression. Was it not truly coincidental? To dismiss it merely as chance, could it be that the reason he gave his child the name Suho was... The feeling was strange. Until now, all the other successor candidates had striven so hard solely to obtain a single name. Yet Suho, from the moment of his birth, already possessed a name personally bestowed by the being who was the greatest fragment of brilliant light and the Shadow Monarch. That name, decided upon after much deliberation by such a great being, called out thousands, tens of thousands of times with affection. Sung Suho, Suho. A direct translation of its meaning would be, one who protects and guards the stars. and before long, that child had grown into an adult. And through the numerous achievements he had cultivated through his own growth, he had finally seized a new name. Guardian of the World Tree. Sung Jinwoo, just how far did you see? The Dragon King Antares eventually let out a hollow laugh. For a long while, he stared blankly at Sung Suho's form, simultaneously recalling the image of him who, even at this moment, must be engaged in a fierce war with the Itarim in outer space. Antares chuckled softly, wondering if he knew that his son was striving so hard to protect this planet, to live up to that name. After all, the meaning of their names was the authority and mission given to the monarchs who inherited the primordial darkness. Thus, Sung Suho's long class change quest came to an end. At a window overlooking the vast snow-swept square in the snow-covered Kremlin Palace in Moscow, Yuri Orlov, who had been leaning back on a plush sofa, suddenly opened his eyes. Had he dozed off from the alcohol? His forehead was drenched in cold sweat. What, was it a dream? As his head finally cleared, a sigh of relief escaped his lips. Simultaneously, his teeth clenched. It's been a while since I've had that dream. Yes, it was just a dream. Just a terrible nightmare. His current self. The heart of Russia. Kremlin Palace. His form, surrounded by all manner of luxuries. This was the true reality. But despite having climbed to such heights, why did the memories of that time keep appearing even in his dreams, tormenting him? Damn it! Yuri Orlov irritably grabbed the crystal bottle on the table, a 30-year-old Scotch whiskey, an expensive liquor costing a staggering several $1,000s a bottle. Something he wouldn't have dared even smell just a few years ago. He roughly brought the precious liquor to his lips and gulped it down. Gulp, gulp, gulp. Then he suddenly hurled the bottle to the floor. Crash! A loud noise echoed through the Kremlin Palace. Thousands of dollars worth of liquor, barely touched, spilled onto the floor. But so what? It wasn't a waste at all. He was now Prime Minister Yuri Orlov of Russia, the dictator of Russia. Grr! Yes! Of course it's all a dream! This is the real me. He roared and burst into loud laughter, but the cold sweat on his forehead still hadn't disappeared. However, just a few seconds later, his attendant, who was always waiting outside as usual, heard the noise, opened the door, and entered. Then, after quickly surveying the room, without the slightest sign of surprise, he immediately knelt and began to pick up the broken glass shards. Such incidents were familiar to Yuri Orlov's attendants. The Prime Minister Yuri Orlov had always lived in a drunken stupor, always filled with irritation. When working under him, the most important thing was to clean up and disappear as quickly and as carefully as possible to avoid upsetting him. That crucial fact was already common knowledge among the attendants, who had been replaced several times. And above all, it was also well known that Prime Minister Yuri Orlov greatly enjoyed watching them from behind, observing their every action as they kowtowed and tiptoed around him. Even now, the attendant, kneeling and cleaning the floor, had to quicken his hands due to the blatant gaze of Russia's great dictator felt from behind. The effect was immediate. The irritable expression Yuri Orlov wore after the nightmare vanished as if it had never been, replaced by a satisfied smile. Yuri Orlov, this time with a pleasant voice, unlike a moment ago, picked up an even more expensive bottle of whiskey and ordered his attendant. "Bring the medicine." The attendant answered without raising his head. "Yes, Prime Minister. But taking psychiatric medication with alcohol is—" "Are you daring to give me advice?" Orlov's voice sharpened. The attendant immediately bowed his head. "My apologies, Prime Minister. I will bring it right away." Only then, as the attendant hastily opened a drawer and took out the medicine, Orlov sneered at him openly and said, "Don't drink alcohol with medicine. That only applies to non-awakened like you. It's no problem for an S-rank awakened like me. My body is different from ordinary humans." Hearing those words, the attendant kept his mouth firmly shut and handed him the medicine. In times like these, it was more beneficial to silently do as ordered than to respond. Yuri Orlov quickly lost interest in the unamusing reaction. He took the prescribed psychiatric medication, and with his other hand, he clutched the most expensive bottle from his collection and walked to the window. With a leisurely gaze, he took in the view of snow-covered Moscow outside his window. Red Square, the Kremlin. The entire city stretching beyond lay beneath him. And the citizens, no, The gutter trash were crawling beneath his feet. Yes, this is the true reality. He could finally smile brightly. Yes, indeed, a dream was just a dream. But no matter how much he tried to escape, there was a past that always chased him. And not even that long ago, just 3 years prior. His life right before he luckily awakened as an S-rank. The life of the man named Yuri Orlov back then was nothing more than garbage. A beggar ignored, kicked, and ridiculed by everyone in Russia. From childhood, he roamed the back alleys, begging, surviving day by day on that money. Afraid that if he saved even a little, other beggars would steal it, he was an alcoholic who invariably spent any leftover money on lottery tickets or alcohol. Thus, drunk every day, a piece of street refuse who only brawled with other beggars. That was the man named Yuri Orlov, who had lived half his life, no, his entire life like that. But after he had passed middle age, having achieved nothing, only growing older. One day, he suddenly awakened and instantly rose to his current position. All of this was not effort, but luck. So just as he had suddenly awakened one day, he feared when all of this might suddenly disappear in an instant. He was anxious. Naturally, he couldn't help but be anxious, because in climbing this far, he had contributed nothing through his own efforts. Awakening. He knew better than anyone that this was merely a stroke of immense luck that had suddenly come to him one day, like winning the lottery. That's why he needed medicine. Not some narcotic, but a tranquilizer prescribed by the most skilled psychiatrist in Russia, his personal physician. Gulp. Was it just his imagination? As soon as he swallowed the medicine, the anxiety melted away like snow. Then, he could now confidently recall the nightmare he had just had. His beggar days, a lifetime spent roaming the back alleys. Malevolent Tsar, Little Emperor. It was when Yuri Orlov was merely 12 years old that he came to be called by that nickname among the back alley beggars. The Russian cold was harsh, and in such a climate, the ecosystem of the slums was even more ruthless. At the tender age of 9, Yuri Orlov committed his first murder. The reason? Simply to snatch a piece of bread held in the hand of a friend he begged with. But even if it was a brick, the blow from a mere child wasn't enough to kill someone. However, even if it didn't kill immediately, the Siberian cold worsened the wound. And eventually, a few days later, that friend was found as a cold corpse. The moment he woke up in the morning and witnessed that corpse, Yuri Orlov couldn't suppress a laugh. He had realized something important. So it was this easy. The fact that humans, surprisingly, lose their lives very easily. Upon realizing that truth, Yuri Orlov began to see the world differently. Look at them. The citizens who threw him coins with pity, the rich who clutched far more money than that. No matter how smug those bastards acted while living, in the end, they're all just people who die from a single brick. Yes, just one brick was all it took. It started from then. Yuri Orlov, despite his young age, began to roam the back alleys, threatening beggars in the same situation as himself. With a single brick in hand, the harsh Russian cold was sufficiently threatening in itself. In such an environment, if a wound developed, it would worsen into a fatal injury for the beggars. Therefore, Yuri Orlov's young age was not a problem at all. He initially targeted beggars weaker and younger than himself. Then, gaining confidence, he extended his reach to beggars older and larger than himself. After all, it didn't matter who the opponent was. He just had to target them while they were asleep. Thus, just 3 years later, Yuri Orlov was reigning over all the beggars in the back alleys. Under the name Little Emperor, he taught the other beggars fear. He instilled in them the terror that they could be beaten to death, bleeding, at any time if they defied him, not just die of starvation normally. But that, in fact, applied equally to Yuri Orlov himself. No matter if he was called Little Emperor or whatever, he was ultimately alone. If several beggars attacked him simultaneously at any time, Yuri Orlov himself could become a cold corpse overnight. So he assigned a hierarchy to the beggars who had submitted to him. He structured a system where all were forced to make those weaker and younger than themselves beg, and then extorted their earnings. A small pyramid. Thus, a small ecosystem of the back alleys was created. A society where everyone watched each other. A system where the strong exploited the weak. Naturally, at the very top, the Little Emperor, Yuri Orlov, reigned. But he never let his guard down, because his position could be replaced at any time. Just as he had done, it would all be over if some bastard suddenly struck him on the back of the head with a brick on any given night. Anyone could sit in this position he had achieved. So the next idea Orlov came up with was acts of cruelty to test loyalty. Mikhail, lock this bastard up. Don't feed him anything. Little Mikhail. Yuri Orlov made an example of one young beggar who defied his orders and locked him in prison. He confined him in the basement of an abandoned building where no one lived and forcibly starved him for several days. And he periodically made all the other beggars watch Mikhail, trapped inside, crying his eyes out. However, there was one surprising fact here. The door to that basement was not locked. But Mikhail, that young beggar, couldn't take a single step out of that unlocked basement. If I come out, I die. Because he lacked courage. For little young Mikhail, daring to defy the little emperor's command was far more terrifying than starvation. The effect was tremendous. All the beggars feared the little emperor and couldn't defy his commands. And the little emperor, fearing that this fear among the beggars would fade, periodically repeated such examples. After it was repeated several times, eventually, there was no need to even close the basement door. If you cross this line, you die. The little emperor left the basement door wide open, and with the brick he always carried, scratched a single line on the floor, and he commanded for all beggars to see. This is an invisible wall. If you cross this line, you die by my hand. And before long, no beggar in the back alleys dared to violate that absurd command. Because Yuri Orlov was no longer an ordinary beggar. His words, having committed murder with his own hands several times already, carried true killing intent. And among the beggars who lived day by day without ambition, that killing intent was engraved in their minds as true fear. Thus, merely by drawing a single line on the floor, a perfect prison from which no one could escape was born. An invisible wall, visible only to the eyes of the beggars, was created, and looking back, that prison was the first barrier Yuri Orlov had created on his own. This story, which happened in the back alleys of Russia, was an unknown tale among beggars that occurred long, long before the cataclysm came to Earth. But all of this was ultimately a matter of time. Little Emperor. That nickname was ephemeral anyway. Russians grow up quickly. Even if they are beggars, Russians are naturally well-built. Thus, only a few years had passed. Mikhail, who had been a small young beggar, had, before he knew it, grown much larger than Orlov. And one night, shall we go? Mikhail, having inhaled deeply the frigid Siberian air, lit a cigarette and picked up a brick from the ground. There was no need to sneak up from behind. It was clear who was stronger just by looking at their physical differences. However, because of the fear forcibly engraved in his mind since childhood, his hands were trembling. The more they trembled, the tighter he gripped the brick. Thus, that day, Yuri Orlov's nickname, Little Emperor, came to an end. And from that day on, Yuri Orlov's true nightmare began. Mikhail, I will find that bastard no matter what. Crash! Yuri Orlov, snappy, nang out of his thoughts, ended up throwing the liquor bottle he was holding again. Then, an attendant who quickly opened the door and entered, prostrated himself on the floor as before, and began to clean up the broken glass. But this time, a secretary who entered with him approached Yuri Orlov with a stiff expression. Prime Minister, there is something you need to see. I'm already seeing it. As he roared, the secretary flinched and hastily stepped back. There was no need for a report. Just then, breaking news from around the world was being broadcast on the large TV hanging on the wall. Breaking news. The unidentified creatures that attacked major cities around the world have all been exterminated. In the battle that took place in front of the Statue of Liberty in New York, American S-rank hunter Thomas Andre, Korean former national athlete and recently revealed S-rank hunter Cha Hain, has defeated all magical beasts. The Chinese government has officially recognized Liu Jigong as a 7-star hunter for his contributions in this incident. This is an unprecedented. Apostles, every single one of them, is all talk. Yuri Orlov clicked his tongue. At the news that the Apostle of Conquest, who had started off with such momentum, had been exterminated, his drunkenness completely vanished. Beyond the monitor lay the corpses of countless Apostles of Conquest, eradicated like mere insects. This is why the only one I can trust is myself. Watching that scene, Orlov's eyes gleamed ominously. Breaking news reports followed one after another. News that the massive invasion of magical beasts, which had threatened to escalate into the so-called Second Cataclysm, was being resolved with remarkable speed, spread quickly across the globe. What an unsightly mess, truly disgusting. The remnants of the countless butterfly monsters displayed on the news screen were genuinely repulsive. Recalling the Apostle of Conquest's arrogant face, who had started with such bravado only to meet a pathetic defeat, Yuri Orlov tilted a bottle to his lips and took a hearty swig. His expression was filled not with disappointment that his own plans had gone awry, but rather with pure mockery for the Apostle of Conquest's demise. It was understandable. For the past few years, Orlov had dealt with various apostles of the outer gods. It was possible because he, rare among humans, had noticed their existence and had consistently treated the suspicious power they used, called divine power, merely as a means of transaction. Even after realizing their true objective was Earth itself, he hadn't cared in the slightest. Hadn't humans themselves been diligently destroying the Earth for the past few thousand years anyway? What difference would a few aliens joining in make now? This world was destined to end sooner or later. No, it would have been much better if it had ended sooner. Orlov, who had lived his entire life as a beggar, had always prayed thus: for all the humans in the world surrounding him to be ruined, for everyone in the world to live even more miserably than himself. But no matter how much he prayed, nothing in the world changed. He was still the only one who was trash, so he realized. There is no God. A God who would listen to his desperate prayers. Where could such a God exist in this world? But there was. In another world, no, another universe. Outer gods, the Itarim. To think gods from an outer universe, desiring the destruction of this world, actually existed. So Orlov dealt with the apostles of the outer gods without hesitation. The outer gods cult? That didn't mean Orlov had become a cultist. His life had been too much like a beggar's to start worshipping anyone. He had no intention whatsoever of relying on any god. Thus, he decided to make deals. Not prayers, but deals. However, in that process, Orlov realized something. The apostles of the outer gods were invariably arrogant. They always looked down on humans. They regarded humanity from a great height, like looking at livestock on a farm. Ultimately, that arrogance had led to their defeat, so it was certainly something worthy of ridicule. After all, Orlov too was human, so even if his own plans failed, it was in a way satisfying. Of course, the fall of the Apostle of Conquest wasn't entirely good news for Orlov either. They were in the same boat after all. But regardless of the Apostle of Conquest's death, the large-scale trouble he had stirred up was quite helpful from Russia's perspective. Until now, Russia had left the suspicious monstrous trees, the Elvenwoods, untreated. A completely opposite response to other countries that were hastily sending hunters to deal with those monstrous trees. That had become a political problem. Because of it, countries like the United States and the World Hunter Association had been pressuring Russia from all sides. Why is Russia not dealing with the Elvenwoods? Reveal the reason for that. If you continue to leave them as they are, what connection is there between Elvenwood and Russia? Such numerous suspicions and gossip were pressuring Russia from all directions. But thanks to the trouble caused by the Apostle of Conquest, all that attention had shifted elsewhere in one fell swoop. In a situation where the Second Cataclysm almost erupted due to the sudden butterfly swarm attack, who would have the luxury to care about a few trees growing in Russia? However, Orlov hadn't anticipated that those butterflies would perish so quickly. Tsk, useless fool. Can't even buy time properly. If this continued, the attention of other countries would soon return to Russia. Since the casualties from this worldwide incident weren't significant, the follow-up measures would also end quickly. There's no time. It will be soon. I have to hurry. A meaningful smile appeared on Orlov's lips as he spoke those words. From a national perspective, the elimination of the Apostle of Conquest was actually a good thing. Swish! As Orlov pulled aside the wide curtain covering his office wall, a large world map was revealed behind it. An electronic display where Russia's vast territory was distinguished in gold. On it, there were particularly bright red dots. These were the fish bowls that Orlov personally managed with special focus, not entrusting them to other politicians. but most of them were fakes, mere dummies to deceive the eyes of the outer god's apostles. The truly important fishbowl was just one. Hey, if the apostles knew, they would have killed me on the spot. Orlov bared his teeth and laughed, staring intently at one of the numerous red dots. The Apostle of Conquest had an unusually large number of clones, even among other apostles. Thus it was extremely difficult to execute his plan while avoiding his numerous gazes, which were everywhere, even though all the necessary materials had already been gathered. But now that all his clones have been eradicated, the time has come. If he missed this timing, he didn't know when or where other apostles might appear, so he had to hurry. Orlov returned to his desk and picked up the phone with a red button. "It's me. Execute the operation. Now." At his firm command, one of the red dots on the world map shone particularly brightly. Watching it, Prime Minister Yuri Orlov's order was given. The opportune time to execute Project Unwithering Spring has finally arrived. Meanwhile, in Suho's modest but comfortable home, a warm breeze blew through the rooms he had lived in since birth, especially today. As the front door opened and Suho stepped inside, a characteristic warm energy greeted him, the smell of rice cooking, the sound of side dishes being prepared. The entire house was filled with the long-missed scent of daily life. And then, "Are you home?" A gentle voice. The moment he heard that greeting, Suho froze on the spot. Chahain. Even now, the news was repeatedly broadcasting her heroic feats, how she, hailed as a national hero, had stopped the invasion of magical beasts using immensely powerful lightning magic. And there she was, ladle in hand, smiling brightly at Suho. Though many things had happened, she looked just as she always did, as if nothing had occurred. "You've been through a lot, my son." Just like on any ordinary day when Suho returned from school, as if Chahain hadn't been missing for years. It was such a long-awaited return to normalcy that Suho suddenly felt a lump in his throat. "I'm home." He couldn't say more. It was a natural greeting, like any other, but the meaning it held was immense. His mother, back where she belonged after years of absence. Though they had reunited earlier, this was the first time they had gathered at home like this after dealing with the ceaseless incidents and accidents. Chahae-in read her son's heart and, smiling lightly, gestured towards the living room. "The food is ready, so rest for a bit. It's not a holiday, but the whole family has gathered after a long time. Wash your hands before eating." Suho silently nodded at the usual nagging. No more words were needed. The anxiety and worry he had harbored for years melted away before his mother's smile. "Oh my, Suho is here!" His grandmother called out to him from the living room with a welcoming voice. Though advanced in age, she always looked healthy. "Why does our grandson look so thin? Have you been eating properly?" As always, his grandmother fussed, pinching Suho's cheeks. "Indeed, did you fight a war somewhere?" Behind her, his grandfather, Sung Il-wan, was also visible. Though he spoke jokingly, his warm gaze Ard Suho held deep understanding. A war, the real war, was only just beginning. Just as much as Chahae-in, Sung Il-hwan too was currently being hailed on the news as an unparalleled hero who had suddenly appeared, and stories of his exploits were circulating online, riding the algorithms. But at this moment, Sung Il-hwan was just an ordinary grandfather. Next, his aunt and uncle-in-law greeted Suho. "Suho, you're here?" "Oh, Suho, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" Yu Jinho was, as always, a doting uncle-in-law. He meticulously checked Suho's body for even the slightest scratch. And Suho's aunt, Sung Jinwoo, Sung Jinwoo's younger sister, also looked much brighter than when he last saw her. In fact, looking back over the past years, if one had to pick who had suffered the most emotionally, it would undoubtedly be Sung Jinwoo. When she was very young, her older brother suddenly ran away from home. Then even after becoming an adult, her brother and sister-in-law suddenly disappeared. After that, her father, Sung Il-wan, and then even her mother, Park Kyung-hae, had been in danger. In all those situations, there was nothing Sung Jinwoo, an ordinary person, could do. She was simply powerless. All Sung Jinwoo could do was wait for her family with an anxious and fretful heart. Perhaps that was why. She had matured very quickly. Amidst those various situations, Sung Jinwoo made a decision at a very young age to live her daily life diligently. That was the only thing, the best she could do, Jinwoo. "Don't you worry about anything and go to school. The adults will take care of it." At her mother's single sentence, Sung Jinwoo, as always, put on her uniform and went to school, forcibly suppressing her troubled heart, very diligently. Yes, I'm a student, so let's study. Desperately, so that she, at least, wouldn't cause worry, unlike her older brother, who had selfishly run away when he was young. She had decided to simply live her daily life with an endlessly bright demeanor. It was the same when her brother and sister-in-law disappeared. This time, too, Sung Jinwoo had to live her daily life very diligently, if only for their son, Sung Suho. If she, an adult, showed anxiety, Suho would only become more anxious. So Sung Jinwoo once again forced a bright smile and said, "Suho, don't you worry and go to school. The adults will take care of the adult matters." Exactly as she had been taught. Your parents often go on spontaneous trips, don't they? Your aunt will find out where they went off to play this time. Thus, Sung Jinwoo tried to reassure Suho, desperately. Phew, our Suho, you're looking more and more like my older brother, aren't you? Relax your eyes, you rascal. Seeing Suho standing awkwardly stiff in front of the living room, Sung Jinwoo spoke playfully. The whole family is gathered after such a long time, right? Your dad is busy again and couldn't make it, though. Sung Jinwoo knew now, too, what kind of person her older brother was, what kind of existence he was. Because she, too, had been to the Tower of Trials that Yoo Jinho created. Suho, did you know? Your aunt has become so famous lately, it's exhausting, all because of that damn tower. Sung Jinwoo grumbled, glancing sideways at her husband. These days, people from all over the world are endlessly sending DMs to your aunt, saying I'm their younger sister, asking if I'm doing well. I've already got way over 10 million followers on social media. Ahem, perhaps I should have altered that memory a bit. Yoo Jinho suddenly feigned ignorance and retreated to the kitchen, saying he would help with the cooking. Then, pausing in front of the door, he turned back and met Suho's eyes. Anyway, you've worked hard, Suho, with a gaze full of affection. Your uncle, and your dad too, would definitely want to tell you that you're doing well. Yes. At that single sentence, Suho finally let out the breath he had been holding. A smile spread across his face. And Beru, who had been watching the entire scene, holding his breath from beneath the dows, covered his mouth and burst into tears. Thou speakest true. The king would surely deem the young master praiseworthy. The other shadow soldiers also couldn't hold back their tears of emotion. In such a heartwarming atmosphere, a truly harmonious meal began after a very long time. Ding dong. Oh, my sister-in-law, it's already plenty. Did you order delivery too? I'll get it. Yoo Jinho, who was sitting closest to the front door, stood up, blocking Suho, who was about to get up first. Then, Instantly, Yoo Jinho's doting uncle mode vanished, his eyes changing. A cool voice flowed from his lips. It wasn't a delivery. Beyond the front door, there were uninvited guests who had come to Suho's house. Yoo Jinho looked back at him with serious eyes and asked, Suho, do you speak any English? Foreigners who had crossed the ocean to meet Suho stood at the door. One of them was so famous it was impossible not to know his face, and the other was even more famous, but a celebrity who rarely showed her face to the public. Adam White, Mrs. Norma Selner. These individuals, who would absolutely never leave America for trivial matters, had come to find Suho. United States. A quiet suburban residential area. A black sedan slowly passed through an alley. Behind the vehicle, an identical black SUV followed with mechanical precision. The door of the black sedan, having quietly arrived at its destination, opened. Clack, clack, clack. Simultaneously, bodyguards disembarked, searching the surroundings. With ice-cold eyes, they meticulously scanned the area, preparing for any emergency. Area secure, Mr. President. Before the words even finished, the U.S. President and the Director of the Hunter Management Bureau, Adam White, emerged side by side from the presidential vehicle, their faces stern. In response, the bodyguards simultaneously exchanged hand signals, forming a tight perimeter around them. The president waved them off, saying, It's all right, you all wait here. But, Mr. President, the madam does not appreciate such fuss. Saying this, the president gazed intently at the picturesque red-roofed house before him. This house, which looked no different from the surrounding houses, was, contrary to its ordinary appearance, a very special place. To meet the person living in this house, even the highest authority in the U.S. government had to visit in person. Creak. As the president approached the door, it opened from within as if expecting him. "It's been a while, Dave." The person who appeared from inside was a tall young black man. The president was momentarily surprised upon recognizing him. "You've grown a lot. Last time I saw you, I think you only came up to my waist. Dave, your mustache has grown more than I have. When did you become president?" "You rascal." Grin. Despite the president's sudden visit, he bantered casually, and he greeted them as if he had been expecting guests. "Please come in. Grandma said some important guests would be arriving soon and had me bake cookies." At those words, the president let out a soft chuckle. Of course. After all, who was it he was about to meet? Norma Selner, psychic, prophet, clairvoyant, the world's foremost fortune-teller for whom no descriptor felt out of place, was the old woman living in this house. Of course, the president hadn't trusted Norma Selner from the very beginning. However, long before he became president, during his time as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, a position at the pinnacle of information gathering, he had no choice but to shed his skepticism after witnessing Norma Selner resolve numerous intractable cases with supernatural power, cases he himself had given up on. In fact, Madame Norma Selner had once even given him a prophecy, like a casual blessing, that he would become president. Along with that, she had added that even when he became president, it wouldn't necessarily be all good things. She said the timing was unfortunate, I recall. And that prophecy eventually came true. David Brennan, former director of intelligence, had decisively won the recent presidential election. And truly, unfortunately, that last prophecy had also come true. As soon as he became president, as if waiting, major global incidents like the recent ones began to erupt one after another, and he had been living on headache medicine ever since. "Phew, it's been a long time, madam." With mixed emotions, the president, upon entering the house, greeted Norma Selner, letting out a deep sigh. In the drawing room, simple refreshments were already prepared, as if waiting for them. Perhaps she really knew guests would be arriving around this time. Steam was even rising from the freshly baked cookies. Norma Selner, seated in a wheelchair, welcomed them. "Welcome, Dave. You've gained quite a few white hairs since I last saw you. Many things have happened recently." Hearing those words, the president let out another deep sigh, as if the weight of the world was upon him. The president politely greeted Norma Selner, then sat on the sofa and first inquired about her well-being. "More importantly, how is your health? I see you're using a wheelchair." "I may look like this, but I'm quite healthy. The weakening of my muscles is simply due to age." Norma Selner answered nonchalantly. However, the president had a specific reason for asking. Behind her, seated in the wheelchair, were several packed suitcases. She appeared to be about to embark on a long journey despite her physical discomfort. The president asked with a slightly bewildered expression, "Are you going on a trip somewhere?" Given the current state of affairs, for an elderly person to embark on a long journey during these perilous times was an extremely dangerous act. Setting everything else aside, if someone like Norma Selner were to travel, the president would only feel at ease if he assigned a large security detail to her. Adam White, director of the Hunter Management Bureau, recognizing his concern, spoke up. "If you are going on a trip, we will assign a few of our hunters as bodyguards." At their words, Norma Selner, instead of answering, smiled gently and offered the refreshments she had prepared beforehand. "You both must have rushed here. Please quench your thirst first. Besides, these cookies were just baked, so they're quite delicious." However, they were not in the mood to leisurely sip tea. If it weren't for something extraordinary, the president and the director of the Hunter Management Bureau wouldn't have both come here in person like this. "Madam, forgive my impertinence, but the situation is somewhat urgent." At the president's words, the secretary beside him hurriedly took out a laptop. But before he could even turn it on, Adam White added, "A short while ago, an abnormal climate phenomenon was detected at the North Pole. Considering its scale, it is by no means an ordinary situation. The general public was completely unaware, but until now, very occasionally, completely inexplicable phenomena had occurred on this Earth. Each time, scientists or expert research teams could offer no solutions, because most of them were phenomena far beyond the scope of modern science. and based on past experience, in times like these, seeking out Madame Norma Selner, even if it seemed somewhat unscientific, was the best the government could do. We need your insight, madam. As soon as the president spoke, Norma Selner, without even glancing at the laptop, answered calmly. I am already aware of the situation. However, the answer to that is something you will have to seek from someone else. Someone else, you say? Who might that be? Norma Selner replied to their bewildered reactions. Sung Suho. Sung Suho? Who is that? Hunter Sung Suho of Korea. Go find him. The president was taken aback by the unexpected answer. Simultaneously, Adam White, director of the Hunter Management Bureau's expression hardened to think that name would come from Norma Selner's lips now. It meant the situation at the North Pole was far more serious than anticipated. However, the president, not yet grasping the full implications, impatiently opened the laptop himself. Understood, madam. I will keep that name in mind. But any information you can provide, starting with the situation at the North Pole. Dave, are you too busy with work to play games these days? Pardon? What is that? The president wore a bewildered expression at Norma Selner's unexpected question, which interrupted him. Games, you say? Why bring up games in a situation like this? Solo leveling, Ragnarok. However, when the name of that game flowed from Norma Selner's lips, the president belatedly nodded. No matter how busy he was with national affairs, it was impossible not to know that game. I am aware of it. Regarding that game, I have received detailed analytical reports, so I am well versed in its content. They say it's a game that allows one to forcibly become awakened. However, from my position, making such a rash attempt is... I know, it would be somewhat unreasonable for you. For the president to attempt something that might cause unforeseen abnormalities would be an irresponsible act. Norma Selner nodded as if in understanding. However, I recommend you try it at least once, perhaps after your term ends. If someone else had said it, he would have dismissed it. But the moment those words came from Norma Selner's mouth, they carried a weight that even the President of the United States could absolutely not ignore. Therefore, before bringing up the main reason for his visit, the President couldn't help but focus on that game first. Madam, is there perhaps a specific reason why I absolutely must play that game myself? Yes, it is a truly well-made game. Is that the entirety of the reason? The president's expression grew even more puzzled. At his appearance, Norma Selner smiled faintly and opened her mouth. That game allows us to remember the past we had forgotten, the history that has disappeared. Remember, you say? Yes, now it's all just a memory. The president couldn't properly understand Norma Selner's words, murmured with a somewhat distant gaze. The words of a prophet were always like this, abstract and vague, open to various interpretations, but that was his misunderstanding. Until now, Norma Selner had always given direct and concrete prophecies. However, depending on who heard them, they simply found it difficult to understand. You will understand my words if you play the game yourself. Norma Selner simply smiled and said, even though they are now old and faded memories, I still hope that everyone remembers them. Sad but precious and bitter memories that shine brighter than ever. Norma Selner's voice, uttering prophetic words as if talking to herself, echoed softly in the quiet drawing room. Her gaze already seemed to be looking at a completely different era, not reality, appearing distant and sorrowful. Looking back, those days were excessively desperate and horrific. A piece of history now vanished. But undeniably real, all the memories and stories of that era are contained intact within that game. However, to all those living in this current era, forcibly reminding them of all the memories of that time would only amplify shock and confusion. The numerous frustrations and wounds that all of humanity felt and experienced at that time. The long history of countless deaths stained with despair and fear. And if the current humanity, living a history newly written over it, were to vividly recall the memories of that time now, it would be utter chaos. Too many things have changed already. A new history was already being recorded on the current Earth. In the meantime, someone who had lost a loved one might have reunited with them as if by fate, and someone else might have forgotten everything and met a new connection, forcing them to vividly recall the memories of despair and frustration experienced long ago. Who would truly appreciate that? Of course, some might be grateful, but the confusion would be far greater. But Sung Suho, cleverly, adopted a method of conveying the stories of the vanished history as indirectly as possible, so as not to cause a major clash of memories. A game. Using the very indirect and kind storytelling device of a virtual reality game, which was very familiar to the current humanity. So as they continued to play that game, all users would very naturally, slowly retrace and accept the memories of the past, the scars, as indirectly as possible, recalling the important forgotten memories as if listening to an old, well-worn tale. But among them, one that absolutely must be remembered, the memory of him for whom everyone living in this era should be grateful, could be recalled very clearly. Sung Jinwoo. Thanks to that, even at this moment, the number of people remembering all the things he had done for humanity was gradually increasing, and they themselves were directly experiencing his life, walking the path he had walked. Back then, in those days, the long journey of him, who walked alone, shouldering all the burdens of the world in a place no one knew. And thus, at some point, naturally like clothes getting wet in a drizzle, all of humanity living in the pre-sent era would come to empathize with his heart. To survive, one must become strong oneself. And eventually, paradoxically, they will understand that now it is no longer me alone. They would come to realize, so that he no longer fights alone, so that now everyone can combine their strength and hearts to protect the world, so that we all can protect this world, so that he is no longer lonely, because it's a truly well-made game. Norma Selner, well aware of this fact, showed a gratified smile, and her distant gaze returned from the past to reality, passing President Dave and landing on Director of the Hunter Management Bureau, Adam White. Therefore, we must go to meet Sung Suho now, his admirable son, who planned this game solely for his father. At Norma Selner's firm words, the President and Adam White finally realized the purpose of the suitcases neatly placed before them, and their expressions hardened. Madam, are you by any chance planning to go to Korea? It's too dangerous. It was only a few days ago that a massive swarm of monstrous butterflies invaded the entire world from the sky. Of all times, to fly on a plane to Korea, on the other side of the globe, during this crisis? All airports in the U.S. were currently shut down, just in case some of those butterflies were still lurking somewhere. Yet if she insisted on going, it meant using a private plane, which was even more dangerous. It meant circumnavigating half the globe. However, before they could rashly object, Norma Selner's prophecy weighed on their minds. Is there perhaps a reason why you must meet Hunter Sung Suho in person, madam? Just then. Going to Korea? A deep male voice suddenly came from behind. Everyone turned their heads in surprise. In the corner of the living room, where no one had been just seconds before, stood a man of immense stature. It was Thomas Andre. At that moment, all the bodyguards who had been waiting outside the house urgently kicked open the door and rushed inside. Mr. President, are you all right? Though they had been ordered to wait outside, the sudden appearance of an overwhelmingly powerful presence inside the house made them reflexively shield the president. Recognizing who it was, they couldn't help but tense up further and adopt a guarded stance. Thomas Andre. Good heavens! Don't move. Hands up. Who was Thomas Andre? Just moments ago, he was the man who had transformed into a giant larger than the Statue of Liberty in the skies above New York and stopped the invasion of the monstrous butterfly swarm. The entire world had witnessed his exploits, and the U.S. government had officially recognized him as a national-level hunter. But that also meant everyone now knew that Thomas Andre could conquer the entire United States if he so wished. For such a person to appear before the president meant the bodyguards had to prevent the worst-case scenario, even at the cost of their lives. Though it was obvious they wouldn't be able to stop him. Tsk! Such a fuss. But Thomas Andre merely chuckled at the bodyguards' reaction, ignored them, and turned to Norma Selner, asking playfully, Grandma, do you speak any Korean? At his question, Norma Selner burst into laughter. After all, it was Norma Selner herself who had been telling Thomas to study Korean for ages. She replied in Korean far more fluent than Thomas Andre's. I've been waiting, Thomas. All the airports are closed. Would you open a gate to Korea for me? Kuhaha, are you asking me, the king of giants and monarch of conquest, for an escort now? Thomas Andre laughed heartily and readily nodded. That's not difficult. Then he lowered his gaze, looked at his own feet, and spoke. Hey, you there. You've been following me around all this time for this very moment, haven't you? He was speaking to his shadow. Then, surprisingly, the shadow at Thomas's feet slowly rose. At its appearance, the bodyguards tensed even more. Some were so startled they drew upon their mana, but the president raised a hand to stop them. Keekless actions in such a situation would only invite greater danger. After all, if he decided on something, no one here could stop him. In that breathtaking tension, Thomas Andre commanded the shadow soldier, I want to go to Suho. Open a gate to where Suho is now. At Thomas's words, the shadow soldier scratched its head, then, as if Suho's permission had been granted, it promptly nodded. Then, whoosh! The shadow soldier's body swirled on the spot, and a passage of darkness opened. Thomas looked at Norma Selner and Adam White. Well, let's go. This gentleman, too. Adam White looked at the president with a bewildered expression. As the president quietly nodded, he hesitated before walking towards the passage of darkness with Norma Selner.